The bullet that killed Victoria Gardner's father went clean through the saloon window. But it was her mouth that folks said caused all the trouble in Wheatland, Wyoming Territory, that summer of 1878. Victoria stood on the platform outside the general store 3 days after they buried her father, her copper hair gleaming in the afternoon sun, as she addressed the gathering crowd with the fervor of a tent revival preacher. She wore a simple blue calico dress that had seen better days, but her voice carried clear as a church bell across the dusty street. And furthermore, if Sheriff Bradley had been doing his job properly instead of spending every afternoon at the card table, my father would still be alive today, she declared, her green eyes flashing with righteous anger. That bullet came from somewhere, and the man who fired it is still walking free while my father lies cold in the ground. Someone ought to stuff a sock in that girl's mouth, muttered Mrs. Henderson to her husband as they hurried past. She has been carrying on for near an hour now, agreed Mr. Henderson, shaking his head. Victoria heard them. She heard everything, noticed everything, and commented on most of it. It was both her greatest strength and her most notorious flaw. Her father, bless his departed soul, had always said she came into the world talking and never saw fit to stop. Her mother had died bringing her into the world 18 years ago, and Victoria had spent her childhood following her father around his small newspaper office, absorbing every word, every story, every injustice that crossed his desk. Now the newspaper was hers, though the bank held the note on it. The problem was that women did not run newspapers, at least not in Wheatland, Wyoming Territory. Women certainly did not stand on platforms making speeches about corrupt sheriffs and unsolved murders. Miss Gardner, I think you had better step down now. Sheriff Bradley himself appeared at the edge of the small crowd that had gathered, his hand resting meaningfully on his gun belt. He was a thick man with a graying mustache and eyes that had seen too much and cared about too little. I will step down when I have finished making my point, Sheriff, Victoria replied, lifting her chin. Or are you going to arrest me for exercising my right to free speech? That would make an excellent headline for next week's edition. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people nodded in agreement with Victoria. Others shook their heads, muttering about forward women and loose tongues. From across the street, leaning against the hitching post outside the feed store, a tall man watched the entire exchange in silence. Deacon Rawlins had been watching Victoria Gardner for the better part of a year now, ever since he had come to Wheatland to rebuild his life. At 32, he had lived through enough violence, enough noise, enough chaos during the war to last him several lifetimes. He had found peace in the silence of his small ranch 5 miles outside of town, in the company of his horses and cattle, in the vast Wyoming sky that stretched endlessly above his land. But Victoria Gardner made him want to break his silence. She was still talking, her words tumbling over each other in her rush to get them all out, her hands gesturing emphatically as she made point after point. Deacon could not help but notice the way the sunlight caught in her hair, turning it to burnished copper. He noticed the firm set of her jaw, the flash of intelligence in her eyes, the way she held her ground even as Sheriff Bradley grew increasingly red-faced. "That woman talks enough for 3 people," commented Jake Morrison, the feed store owner, following Deacon's gaze. Deacon did not respond. He rarely did. In the year he had been in Wheatland, most folks had learned that Deacon Rawlins was a man of few words. Some thought him rude. Others thought him strange. A few thought him mysterious. Deacon did not much care what they thought. He bought his supplies, paid his bills, and kept to himself. But he kept watching Victoria Gardner. Finally, Sheriff Bradley had apparently had enough. "Miss Gardner, you are disturbing the peace. I am going to have to ask you to come with me." "On what charges?" Victoria demanded. "I will think of something," Bradley muttered, reaching for her arm. That was when Deacon moved. He did not run or make a scene. He simply walked across the street with long, measured strides, his boots crunching in the dirt. He was a tall man, just over 6 feet, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of weathered denim. He wore plain clothes, a rancher's working attire, but there was something in the way he carried himself that made people step aside. "Sheriff," Deacon said quietly as he reached the platform. It was the first word he had spoken in town in 3 days. Bradley turned, his hand still on Victoria's arm. "Rawlins, this does not concern you." "Seems to me the lady is just exercising her constitutional rights," Deacon said, his voice calm and measured. "Seems to me that is not a crime." "Seems to me you should mind your own business," Bradley shot back. Deacon met his gaze steadily. "Maybe I am making it my business." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Victoria looked down at this stranger who had come to her defense, this quiet man she had seen around town but never really noticed. Everyone in Wheatland knew Deacon Rawlins kept to himself. No one had ever heard him speak more than a few words at a time, and now here he was, facing down the sheriff on her behalf. "You want to spend a night in jail, Rawlins?" Bradley asked, his voice low and threatening. "If it comes to that," Deacon replied with a slight shrug. Bradley's jaw worked as he considered his options. A crowd had gathered now, watching this unexpected confrontation with great interest. Finally, he released Victoria's arm and stepped back. "This is not over, Miss Gardner," he said. "You keep making accusations about my office, and we are going to have a serious problem." "The truth often does create problems, Sheriff," Victoria said sweetly. Bradley stormed off, and the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with gossip about what they had just witnessed. Victoria turned to face her unexpected defender, looking down at him from her position on the platform. "Thank you," she said, studying him with open curiosity. "Though I could have handled him myself." "I am sure you could have," Deacon replied. "You are Deacon Rawlins, are you not? You have the ranch out past Miller's Creek." "Yes, madam." "I have seen you in town, but I do not think I have ever heard you speak before. Not really speak, I mean. You are terribly quiet." "Some folks might say that is a virtue," Deacon said, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly. Victoria laughed, a bright musical sound. "Some folks say I talk too much. They say I have the unfortunate habit of speaking every thought that enters my head. I would not say that is entirely unfortunate. No, no, madam. Sometimes the things that need saying are the things most folks are too afraid to say." Victoria tilted her head, regarding him with new interest. "That is a remarkably astute observation, Mr. Rawlins. Just Deacon is fine. And you may call me Victoria, or Vic if you prefer." "My father always called me Vic." Her face clouded over at the mention of her father, and for a moment, her constant stream of words faltered. "I am sorry about your father," Deacon said quietly. "I did not know him well, but he seemed like a good man." "He was the best man I have ever known," Victoria replied, her voice catching slightly. Then she cleared her throat and squared her shoulders. "Which is why I am going to find out who killed him and make sure they hang for it. That is a dangerous undertaking for anyone, much less a young woman on her own." "Are you suggesting I am not capable, Mr. Rawlins?" "Sorry, Deacon. I am suggesting that even capable people sometimes need help." Victoria studied him for a long moment. "Are you offering?" Deacon had not planned to offer anything. He had planned to go back to his ranch, to his silence, to his solitary life. But as he looked up at Victoria Gardner with her fiery hair and fierce determination, he found himself saying, "Yes, madam, I reckon I am." And just like that, everything changed. Over the next week, Victoria Gardner discovered that having Deacon Rawlins around was both comforting and disconcerting. He showed up at her father's newspaper office every morning at 8 o'clock sharp, silent as a shadow, and set about helping her sort through her father's papers and notes. He never said much, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. "Your father was investigating something," Deacon said one morning, holding up a ledger filled with notations in her father's cramped handwriting. "These numbers, they look like they might be tracking money." Victoria set down the stack of old newspapers she had been organizing and crossed to his side. The office was small, cluttered with the detritus of years of journalism. Old printing equipment took up one corner, and papers were stacked on every available surface. It smelled of ink and dust and memories. "Let me see," she said, leaning over his shoulder to examine the ledger. She was close enough to catch the scent of him, something clean and masculine like leather and soap and open air. "Oh my, these are not newspaper expenses. These are something else entirely." She began to talk through her thought process, words tumbling out rapidly as she traced her finger down the columns. "See here, this entry is marked with the initials JB, and these amounts are far too large to be legitimate business expenses. And here, CB, and these dates correspond with the cattle auctions last fall. And this one marked RB, that is the same week the stage was robbed outside of town." Deacon listened patiently as she worked through the puzzle aloud, her mind racing ahead faster than her words could keep up. It did not bother him the way it seemed to bother everyone else. He found he rather liked listening to her think. "I believe my father discovered some kind of financial scheme," Victoria concluded, turning to face Deacon. "Something involving several prominent men in town, if these initials mean what I think they mean." "That would certainly give someone a motive to silence him," Deacon observed. Victoria's eyes widened. "You think he was murdered deliberately, not just a stray bullet?" "A stray bullet that came through a window and hit one man out of 20 in that saloon. That seems unlikely." Victoria sank down into her father's worn desk chair, the magnitude of this revelation washing over her. "Then someone in this town killed him in cold blood, someone he probably knew." "Looks that way." For once, Victoria was silent. Deacon watched her process this information, watched her shoulders slump briefly under the weight of it before she straightened them again with visible effort. She was strong, this woman who talked too much, stronger than she probably knew. "We need to figure out who these initials belong to," Victoria said finally, her voice steadier than Deacon had expected. "We need proof." "That is dangerous work," Deacon warned. "I am aware. These men, if they killed once, they will kill again. I am aware of that too." Victoria met his gaze squarely. "But I cannot just let my father's murder go unavenged. I cannot pretend I did not find this. It is not in my nature to stay silent." "No," Deacon agreed, something that might have been a smile touching his lips. "I reckon it is not." Over the following days, they worked together to unravel the mystery her father had died investigating. Victoria did most of the talking, thinking aloud as she pieced together clues and connections. Deacon did most of the listening, but his presence was steady and reassuring. He had a way of noticing things, small details that Victoria might have overlooked in her rush. "This CB," he said one afternoon, "could be Charles Brennan. He owns the largest ranch in the county." "And JB could be James Bradley," Victoria added, her eyes lighting up with the connection. "The sheriff. Oh my God, the sheriff. That is why he was so angry when I made those accusations. He is involved in whatever scheme got my father killed." "We still need proof," Deacon cautioned. Victoria was already pacing the small office, her skirts swishing as she moved, her words coming faster and faster. "If the sheriff is involved, then we cannot go to him with what we find. We would need to go to the territorial marshal, but he is based in Cheyenne, which is 2 days' ride from here, and we would need something more concrete than a ledger full of initials and numbers. We need to figure out what they were doing, what they are still doing probably, because I doubt they stopped just because my father is dead. The cattle auctions, Deacon said quietly. Victoria stopped pacing and turned to him. What about them? Your father noted large amounts of money changing hands during the auctions. What if they are manipulating the prices somehow? Or stealing cattle and selling them at auction with forged bills of sale? That would explain why Charles Brennan's ranch has grown so large so quickly, Victoria said, resuming her pacing. Everyone just assumed he was a good businessman, but what if he has been stealing cattle from smaller ranchers and selling them as his own? It would take more than just him, Deacon pointed out. He would need someone to forge the papers, someone to look the other way legally, maybe someone to help move the cattle. The sheriff, a ranch owner, who else? Victoria mused. RB, who could that be? Deacon was quiet for a moment, thinking. Richard Barton. He is the county clerk. He would have access to all the official paperwork. That is it, Victoria breathed. That has to be it. A ring of thieves operating right under everyone's noses, and my father found out about it. They looked at each other across the cluttered office, the magnitude of what they had uncovered settling over them. We need to be very careful, Deacon said. These are powerful men, I know. They will not hesitate to kill again if they think we are a threat. I know that too. Victoria moved closer to him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Why are you helping me, Deacon? You barely knew my father. You do not owe me anything. It was a fair question. Deacon had been asking himself the same thing for days now. The honest answer was that he did not entirely know. Or rather, he knew but was not ready to put it into words yet. Maybe I have been silent long enough for both of us, he said finally, his voice low and rough. Victoria blinked, surprise flickering across her expressive face. What does that mean? It means I spent a long time not saying things that needed to be said, not standing up when I should have stood up. After the war, I came out here to find peace in the quiet, but maybe some things are more important than peace, like justice. Like justice, Deacon agreed, and like making sure good people do not have to fight their battles alone. Something shifted between them in that moment, something neither of them was quite ready to name. Victoria found herself noticing things about Deacon she had not noticed before. The way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he was thinking. The steadiness of his presence, like a rock in a river, unmoved by the current rushing around it. The way he listened to her as if every word she said mattered, even the silly ones, even the ones that probably did not need saying. And Deacon found himself wanting to tell her things he had not told anyone in years. About the war, about the sounds that still woke him some nights, about the reasons he had chosen silence. But the words did not come easily to him the way they did to her, so instead he just stood there, close enough to smell the lavender soap she used, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. We should go to the next cattle auction, Victoria said, breaking the moment. If we can catch them in the act, we will have the proof we need. The next auction is in 3 days, Deacon said, but you cannot go. If they see you there, they will know we are onto them. Then what do you suggest? I go, I am just another rancher. No one will think twice about me being at an auction. Victoria frowned. I do not like the idea of you walking into danger alone. I can handle myself. I am sure you can, but still. She worried her lower lip between her teeth, a gesture Deacon was beginning to recognize as a sign she was working through a problem. What if we both went, but I stayed out of sight? I could watch from a distance, take notes on what I see. I am a journalist, after all. Observation is what I do. It is too dangerous. No more dangerous than you going alone, Victoria. Do not Victoria me in that tone, she said, planting her hands on her hips. We are partners in this investigation, are we not? You do not get to suddenly decide to protect me by shutting me out. I am not trying to shut you out. Then what are you trying to do? Deacon ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. This was why he preferred silence. Words always seemed to tangle things up. I am trying to keep you safe. Why? Victoria challenged. Why do you care so much about keeping me safe? It was a trap, and Deacon knew it. But he also knew that Victoria deserved honesty, even when honesty was hard. Because somewhere along the way I started caring about you, he said quietly. More than I should, probably. Victoria's breath caught. For once, she seemed at a loss for words. I know I am not the kind of man a woman like you would look at twice, Deacon continued, the words coming slowly but steadily. I am too quiet, too set in my ways. I have been alone so long I barely remember how to be around people. But you are like sunlight breaking through clouds. You talk and you laugh and you fill up all the empty spaces with words and life and fire. And I find myself not wanting to go back to the silence I had before. Deacon, Victoria whispered. So yes, I want to keep you safe, he finished. Because the thought of anything happening to you, it bothers me more than I know how to say. Victoria stood very still, her heart hammering in her chest. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had ever made her feel like her constant talking was not a flaw but a gift. No one had ever looked at her the way Deacon was looking at her now, as if she were something precious and rare. I talk too much, she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. Everyone says so, I know. I say things without thinking. I ask too many questions. I have opinions about everything. I know that too. And you do not mind, Deacon shook his head slowly. I reckon I have been silent long enough for both of us. Victoria laughed, but it came out more like a sob. Before she could think better of it, she closed the distance between them and threw her arms around him. Deacon stiffened in surprise for just a moment before his arms came up to hold her, tentative at first, then stronger. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the dusty newspaper office, neither of them speaking. For once, Victoria did not need words. And for once, Deacon did not mind the silence because it was a comfortable silence, the kind shared between two people who understood each other. When they finally pulled apart, Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. We will go to the auction together, she said firmly. As partners. Deacon nodded. He knew better than to argue with her when she used that tone. As partners. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Victoria continued to run her father's newspaper, though she had to fight tooth and nail to convince the bank to give her just a little more time before they foreclosed. Deacon continued to run his ranch, though he found himself spending more and more of his time in town, ostensibly helping Victoria, but really just wanting to be near her. They were careful not to be seen together too much. The last thing they needed was to tip off the men they were investigating. But in the evenings, after the town had settled down for the night, Deacon would come to the back door of the newspaper office, and they would work together by lamplight, going over her father's notes and planning their strategy. Victoria learned that Deacon had served in the war, that he had seen terrible things that still haunted him, that he had come west to escape the memories. She learned that he was a man of deep principles, that his silence was not rudeness but a deliberate choice, a way of holding himself apart from a world that had hurt him too much. And Deacon learned that beneath Victoria's constant stream of words was a sharp mind and a brave heart. She told him about growing up without a mother, about how her father had raised her to think for herself, even though that was not how most young women were raised. She told him about her dreams of becoming a real journalist, of writing stories that mattered, of making a difference in the world. "People think women should be quiet and decorative," she said one evening as they pored over maps of the surrounding ranches. "They think we should keep our opinions to ourselves and let the men do all the important work. But my father never treated me like that. He taught me to ask questions, to dig for the truth, to speak up when I saw injustice." "He raised you right," Deacon said. "Did he? Sometimes I wonder, maybe if I were quieter, more demure, life would be easier. Easier is not always better." Victoria looked up at him, a smile tugging at her lips. "You would know, would you not? Nothing about this has been easy for you." "No," Deacon agreed, "but I cannot say I regret it." The night before the auction, Victoria could not sleep. She paced her small room above the newspaper office, going over their plan again and again in her mind. Deacon would attend the auction openly, making a show of looking at cattle. Victoria would position herself in the hayloft of the auction barn, hidden from view but able to see and hear everything. If they witnessed anything suspicious, she would document it while Deacon tried to obtain concrete proof, papers or documents they could take to the territorial marshal. It was a good plan, a solid plan, but so many things could go wrong. A soft knock at her door made her jump. When she opened it, Deacon was standing there, hat in hand. "Could not sleep either?" she asked. "No, madam. Want to come in? I know it is not proper, but I think we are well past worrying about propriety." Deacon stepped inside and Victoria closed the door behind him. Her room was small and cluttered, much like the office below. Books were stacked everywhere, along with papers, clothes, and the general chaos that seemed to follow Victoria wherever she went. "I am worried about tomorrow," she admitted, sitting down on the edge of her narrow bed. Deacon took the only chair in the room, an old wooden thing that creaked under his weight. "Me too," he said. "What if something goes wrong? What if they catch us? Then we run. What if they hurt you?" Deacon looked at her steadily. "I can take care of myself, Victoria. It is you I am worried about. I will be hidden in the loft. I will be safe. Will you?" Deacon leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Because if anything happens to me down there, if things go sideways, I need you to promise me you will run. Do not try to help me. Do not try to be brave. Just run and get to the marshal in Cheyenne." "I am not going to just abandon you," Victoria protested. "You are not abandoning me if I am telling you to go." "Deacon, promise me," he interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. "Please, Victoria. Promise me that if things go wrong, you will save yourself." Victoria stared at him, her heart in her throat. She knew what he was really saying. He was saying that she mattered more to him than his own safety. He was saying that he would rather face danger alone than risk her getting hurt. It was both infuriating and deeply touching. "I promise," she said finally, though they both knew it was a lie. "But only if you promise to be careful. I promise." They sat in silence for a moment, a comfortable silence that Victoria was learning to appreciate. With Deacon, she did not always need to fill the quiet with words. Sometimes it was enough just to be in the same room, breathing the same air. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Always. Earlier, you said you cared about me. Did you mean that?" Deacon met her gaze without flinching. "Yes, I care about you too," Victoria said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I know we have only known each other for a short time, and I know I am not the kind of woman most men want, too loud and opinionated and stubborn. But when I am with you, I feel like maybe those things are not flaws. I feel like maybe I am exactly who I am supposed to be." "You are," Deacon said, his voice low and intense. "You are exactly who you are supposed to be." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "I am scared, Deacon." I am scared of tomorrow, scared of what we might find, scared of losing you before I even really have you." Deacon stood and crossed to the bed, sitting down beside her. He took her hand in his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "I am scared too, but we are going to get through this. We are going to expose these men for what they are, and we are going to make sure your father gets justice. And then what? Then we figure out what comes next, together." Victoria turned to him, her green eyes searching his face. "Promise?" "I promise." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and Deacon wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. They sat like that for a long time, neither speaking, just taking comfort in each other's presence. Eventually, Victoria's breathing evened out, and Deacon realized she had fallen asleep. He stayed with her through the night, keeping watch, keeping her safe, preparing himself for what was to come. The morning of the auction dawned clear and hot. Victoria woke to find herself curled up on her bed, a blanket draped over her. Deacon was gone, but there was a note on her bedside table written in his careful, precise handwriting. "Went to prepare. Meet me at the auction barn at noon. Stay safe. Deacon." Victoria clutched the note to her chest for a moment, then forced herself to get up and get ready. She dressed in her plainest dress, a faded brown cotton that would help her blend into the shadows of the barn loft. She braided her bright hair and tucked it under a bonnet, trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. At 1:45, she made her way to the auction barn on the outskirts of town. The place was already bustling with activity. Ranchers from all over the county had come to buy and sell cattle, and the air was thick with the smell of animals and dust and tobacco smoke. Victoria slipped around to the back of the barn, where a ladder led up to the hayloft. She climbed quickly, trying not to think about how high she was or how far she would fall if she lost her footing. At the top, she found a spot behind a stack of hay bales that gave her a clear view of the auction floor below while keeping her hidden from sight. Below, the auction was getting underway. The auctioneer, a loud man with a voice like gravel, was calling out bids on a string of cattle. Victoria pulled out the small notebook she had brought and began taking notes, documenting everything she saw. At first, everything seemed normal. But then Charles Brennan arrived with a group of men driving a large herd of cattle into the pens. Victoria watched carefully, trying to see if there was anything suspicious about the transaction. That was when she spotted Deacon. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, his hat pulled low over his face, watching everything with those quiet, observant eyes. Victoria's heart squeezed at the sight of him. Please be careful, she thought. The bidding on Brennan's cattle started, and Victoria noticed something odd. The bids were going higher than they should for cattle of that quality. It was as if the auction was rigged, prices artificially inflated. She scribbled notes furiously, trying to capture every detail. Then Sheriff Bradley appeared, walking over to have a quiet word with the auctioneer. Money changed hands, though Victoria could not see how much. The auctioneer nodded and adjusted something in his ledger. This was it. This was the proof they needed. Victoria watched as Brennan sold his entire herd at prices well above market value, money that would be split between the conspirators. It was a brilliant scheme, really. Steal cattle from small ranchers who could not fight back, forge the paperwork through Richard Barton's office, sell them at auction with the sheriff's protection, and split the profits. Victoria was so focused on taking notes that she did not notice the man climbing up the ladder behind her until it was too late. Well, what do we have here?" a rough voice said. Victoria spun around to find one of Brennan's ranch hands standing at the top of the ladder, blocking her escape. He was a hard-looking man with cold eyes and a nasty smile. "You have been poking your nose where it does not belong, Miss Gardner," he said, stepping closer. Victoria's mind raced. She needed to warn Deacon, needed to get away, needed to do something. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Sure you do. The boss has been worried about you ever since your daddy got too curious. Looks like you inherited that particular fault." Below, Deacon had noticed the commotion in the loft. His eyes locked on Victoria's attacker, and his hand moved toward the gun at his hip. "Deacon!" Victoria shouted in warning. Everything happened at once. The ranch hand lunged for Victoria. She dodged, her foot catching in her skirts, and she stumbled backward. The man grabbed her arm, yanking her toward the edge of the loft. Below, Deacon drew his gun. "Let her go!" The auction erupted in chaos. Sheriff Bradley pulled his own weapon, as did several of Brennan's men. The crowd scattered, people diving for cover as the tension exploded into violence. "Drop the gun, Rawlins," Bradley ordered, "or she takes a long fall." Victoria struggled against her captor's grip, but he was too strong. He had her dangling halfway over the edge of the loft now, her feet scrabbling for purchase. "Let her go," Deacon repeated, his voice deadly calm. "This is between you and me." "Wrong." Brennan stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. "This is about people who cannot mind their own business, just like her father." "You killed him," Victoria gasped out. "You killed my father in cold blood." "He should have taken the warning we gave him," Brennan said coldly. "But he kept digging, just like you. Some people do not know when to quit. And some people do not know when they are outnumbered." A new voice rang out. Victoria looked toward the barn entrance and felt a surge of hope. Standing there was Marshal Cooper from Cheyenne, along with half a dozen deputized men, all with guns drawn. "What in the hell?" Bradley sputtered. "Seems someone sent a telegram to Cheyenne 3 days ago," Marshal Cooper said, walking forward calmly. "Detailed allegations of cattle theft, corruption, and murder. I rode out here to investigate, and from what I just heard, sounds like those allegations were right on the money." Victoria's eyes found Deacon's. He had sent the telegram. He had brought the marshal. He had been planning this all along, making sure they would have backup. The man holding Victoria realized the situation had turned against them. He tried to drag her toward the ladder, but Victoria was done being cooperative. She went completely limp, making herself dead weight, and then she drove her elbow back into his ribs with all her strength. He grunted in pain and loosened his grip just enough. Victoria twisted free and scrambled away from the edge, stumbling toward the ladder. Below, the marshal's men were rounding up Brennan, Bradley, and the other conspirators. Deacon holstered his gun and ran to the bottom of the ladder, waiting as Victoria climbed down on shaking legs. The moment her feet touched solid ground, she threw herself into his arms. He caught her, holding her tight, his face buried in her hair. "You are all right," he murmured. "Thank God you are all right." "You sent for the marshal," she said, pulling back to look at him. "I sent the telegram the day after we figured out what they were doing. I was not going to let you walk into danger without backup. But you let me think we were alone. I needed them to make their move, to incriminate themselves. I am sorry. I should have told you." Victoria started to respond, then stopped. She looked at this quiet man who had walked into her life and turned everything upside down, this man who had protected her and believed in her and somehow seen past all her flaws to the person underneath. "I am not angry," she said finally. "You kept me safe. I tried. You succeeded." The marshal approached them, clearing his throat. "Miss Gardner, Mr. Rawlins, I am going to need statements from both of you." Over the next several hours, they gave detailed accounts of everything they had discovered, everything they had witnessed. Victoria turned over her father's ledger and her own notes. Deacon corroborated her story, filling in the details she had missed. By the time the sun began to set, Sheriff Bradley, Charles Brennan, Richard Barton, and 3 of Brennan's ranch hands were in custody, charged with cattle theft, corruption, and murder. The men would be transported to Cheyenne to await trial, but Marshal Cooper assured Victoria that the evidence against them was overwhelming. "Your father would be proud of you," the marshal told her as he prepared to leave. "He was a good man, and he raised a brave daughter." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you, Marshal." As the prisoners were loaded into a wagon for the journey to Cheyenne, Victoria and Deacon stood together watching. The sun was setting over the Wyoming plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "It is over," Victoria said quietly. "Yes, my father can rest now." "Yes," Victoria turned to look at Deacon. "What happens now?" Deacon was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully as he always did. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you meant what you said last night." "About caring for me." "I meant it," Victoria said without hesitation. "Every word." "Then I reckon what happens now is we stop running from danger and start running towards something better." "Like what?" "Like a life together, if you will have me. I know I am not much of a talker. I know I am set in my ways. But I love you, Victoria Gardner. I love your words and your fire and your stubborn determination. I love the way you fill up empty spaces and refuse to be quiet when quiet is expected. I have been silent for too long, but you make me want to speak, want to be heard, want to be part of the noise and chaos of life again." Victoria felt tears streaming down her face now, but she was smiling through them. "I love you too, Deacon Rawlins. And I think you are exactly enough of a talker because you only speak when you have something worth saying. I think we balance each other out. You give me silence when I need it, and I give you words when you need them. We fit." "Yes," Deacon agreed, pulling her into his arms. "We fit." He kissed her then, there in the dusty street with the sunset painting everything gold, and Victoria felt like she had finally found what she had been looking for all her life. Someone who understood her, someone who valued her exactly as she was, someone who did not need her to be quieter or smaller or less than what she was. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small church in Wheatland. Victoria wore her mother's dress, carefully altered to fit her. Deacon wore a new suit that he was clearly uncomfortable in, but he stood tall and proud as he promised to love and cherish Victoria for the rest of his days. The reception was held at Deacon's ranch, which Victoria was already thinking of as their ranch. People came from all over the county to celebrate, many of the same people who had once whispered about Victoria talking too much. But the scandal of the cattle rustling ring and the dramatic arrest of some of the county's most prominent citizens had rather overshadowed any concerns about Victoria's verbosity. "I think they are just relieved I am someone else's problem now," Victoria joked to Deacon as they watched their guests eat and dance and celebrate. "You are not a problem," Deacon said, pulling her close. "You are a gift." Victoria laughed and kissed him. "You have gotten remarkably good at saying exactly the right thing." "I have a good teacher." "Who, me? I just say whatever comes into my head." "Exactly. No filter, no pretense, just honest truth. I am learning from you." Victoria felt her heart swell with love for this man. "What am I learning from you? That silence can be golden. That sometimes the most important things do not need words." "I am not sure I am very good at that lesson yet," Victoria admitted. "You are learning," Deacon assured her, "and I have a lifetime to teach you." They moved into Deacon's ranch house together, and Victoria discovered that married life suited her. She continued to run her father's newspaper, though she renamed it The Wyoming Truth and dedicated it to honest journalism and fighting injustice. Deacon supported her completely, even when her editorials stirred up controversy. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Deacon handled the day-to-day operations while Victoria managed the books and correspondence. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the plains. Sometimes Victoria would talk about her day, her words tumbling over each other in her rush to share everything with him. Sometimes Deacon would share his thoughts, fewer words but carefully chosen. And sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, holding hands, content in each other's presence. A year after their wedding, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She told Deacon the news while he was working in the barn, unable to contain her excitement for even a moment. "I am going to have a baby," she announced, bursting through the barn door. "We are going to have a baby. Can you believe it? I know we have only been married a year, but apparently that is plenty of time for these things to happen. And oh, Deacon, I am so excited and so terrified and so happy all at the same time." Deacon dropped the saddle he had been mending and crossed to her in 3 long strides. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, actually laughing out loud, which was something Victoria had only heard him do a handful of times. "A baby," he said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Victoria asked, suddenly worried. "I know we did not exactly plan this." "I am more than happy," Deacon assured her. "I am blessed. The pregnancy was not easy. Victoria was sick for the first 3 months, and she complained loudly and often about every discomfort and indignity. Deacon bore it all with patient good humor, holding her hair back when she was sick, rubbing her swollen feet, and listening to her endless stream of anxieties about becoming a mother. "What if I am terrible at it?" She worried one night, lying in bed with Deacon's hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. "What if I talk too much and confuse the baby? What if I am not patient enough or gentle enough or good enough?" "You will be a wonderful mother," Deacon said firmly. "Our child will be lucky to have you." "How can you be so sure?" "Because you love with your whole heart, Victoria. Because you fight for what is right. Because you refuse to let the world make you smaller than you are. Those are exactly the qualities a child needs in a mother." Victoria sniffled and wiped at her eyes. "You always know what to say." "I had a good reason to learn." Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1880. The labor was long and difficult, and there were several hours when Deacon was terrified he might lose both Victoria and the baby. But Victoria was as stubborn about bringing new life into the world as she was about everything else, and just after dawn, a baby's cry filled the ranch house. "You have a son," the midwife told Deacon, and he rushed into the bedroom to find Victoria exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny red-faced infant. "Look what we made," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Look at him, Deacon. He is perfect." Deacon sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at his son in wonder. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking Thomas, after my father," Victoria said, "if that is all right with you." "Thomas Rawlins," Deacon tried out the name. "I think your father would be honored." "Thomas Edmund Rawlins," Victoria decided. "Edmund was your father's name, right?" Deacon felt his throat tighten with emotion. Yes, it was." They spent the rest of that day marveling over their son, counting his tiny fingers and toes, watching him sleep, falling completely in love with this small person they had created together. As Thomas grew, it became clear he had inherited his mother's gift for words. By the time he was 2, he talked constantly, asking endless questions and narrating his every action. Victoria found it delightful. Deacon found it exhausting but also oddly comforting. The ranch house that had once been silent was now filled with the sound of voices, and Deacon realized he would not have it any other way. When Thomas was 3, Victoria became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she gave birth to a healthy baby girl in the spring of 1883. A daughter, Deacon breathed, holding the tiny baby with infinite care. She was smaller than Thomas had been, with a wisp of copper hair and eyes that looked up at him with solemn curiosity. "Her name is Sarah," Victoria announced. "Sarah Grace Rawlins." "Sarah," Deacon repeated, smiling down at his daughter. "Hello, Sarah." Where Thomas was loud and boisterous, Sarah was quiet and observant. She reminded Deacon of himself, content to watch and listen rather than always needing to be the center of attention. Victoria worried about her quiet daughter, but Deacon understood. "She is just taking it all in," he explained when Sarah was about 2, and Victoria was fretting about how few words she spoke compared to her brother. "She will talk when she has something to say." He was right. Sarah did eventually start talking, and when she did, her words were carefully chosen and thoughtful. She was a perfect balance between her talkative mother and her quiet father. The years passed peacefully. The ranch continued to prosper. Victoria's newspaper became one of the most respected in the territory, known for its hard-hitting journalism and refusal to back down from controversial topics. Thomas and Sarah grew tall and strong, learning to ride horses and help with the ranch work. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Deacon and Victoria rode out to a spot on their property that overlooked the entire valley. It was sunset, their favorite time of day, and the sky was ablaze with color. "You ever regret it?" Victoria asked, leaning back against Deacon as they sat together on a blanket. "Giving up your quiet life for a loud wife and noisy children?" "Not for a single moment," Deacon said, wrapping his arms around her. "You brought my life back to me, Victoria. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You made me remember what it feels like to really live." "You did the same for me," Victoria said softly. "Everyone always told me I was too much, too loud, too opinionated, but you made me feel like I was exactly enough." "You are more than enough. You are everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Finally, Victoria spoke again. "I have been thinking about something." "Oh, about what you said to me way back at the beginning." "You said you had been silent long enough for both of us. I remember. I think maybe we have found a good balance. I talk, you listen. You speak when it matters. We complement each other." "Yes," Deacon agreed. "We do. I love you, Deacon Rawlins. I love that you saw past my flaws to the person underneath. I love that you never tried to make me smaller or quieter or different. I love that you gave me silence when I needed it and words when I needed them. I love the life we have built together." "I love you too, Victoria Rawlins. I love your fire and your passion and your endless words. I love that you refuse to be anything less than exactly who you are. I love waking up to your voice every morning and falling asleep to it every night. I love the family we have created and the life we share." Victoria turned in his arms and kissed him, and Deacon thought about how far they had both come. Two broken people who had found each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances, who had fought for justice together, who had built a life and a family and a love that would last forever. The sun finally set, painting the sky in shades of purple and pink. Far below, they could see their ranch house with smoke curling from the chimney. Their children would be inside, probably getting into some kind of mischief. Their life was waiting for them, full of noise and chaos and love. "Ready to go home?" Deacon asked. "With you?" "Always," Victoria replied. They rode back to the ranch together as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, ready to face whatever came next. Together, just as they always would be. The seasons continued their endless cycle, and the Rawlins family grew and changed with them. Thomas, now a young man of 21, had inherited his mother's passion for justice, and his father's steady reliability. He helped run the ranch while also writing occasional articles for his mother's newspaper. Victoria was immensely proud of him, though she tried not to say so too often lest she embarrass him. Sarah, at 18, had blossomed into a thoughtful young woman who loved books and horses in equal measure. She was quieter than her mother but shared Victoria's fierce independence. She had recently started teaching at the schoolhouse in Wheatland, and the children adored her patient, gentle manner. Victoria and Deacon had settled into the comfortable rhythms of a long marriage. They still spent evenings on the porch together, though now there were often grandchildren visiting, as Thomas had married a sweet girl named Clara 2 years ago, and they already had a baby daughter of their own. On a warm evening in the summer of 1898, 20 years after Victoria and Deacon had first met, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. It was Victoria's birthday, though she had declared she was no longer counting the years. The house was full of noise and laughter, children running everywhere, food covering every surface. Deacon found Victoria in the kitchen, directing the chaos with the same energy she had brought to everything in life. Her copper hair was now streaked with silver, and lines of laughter framed her eyes, but to him, she was just as beautiful as the day he had first seen her standing on that platform in town. "Come with me," he said, holding out his hand, "but the food. We'll be fine without you for 10 minutes. Victoria let him lead her out the back door and around to the barn, away from the party noise. Inside, it was cool and quiet, dust motes dancing in the slanted sunlight. "What are we doing out here?" Victoria asked, though she was smiling. Deacon pulled a small package from his pocket and handed it to her. "Happy birthday." Victoria's eyes widened. "Deacon, you did not have to get me anything. Open it." She carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a leather-bound journal. When she opened it, she saw that the first page was covered in Deacon's careful handwriting. "What is this?" she asked. "Read it." Victoria began to read, and as she did, tears filled her eyes. Deacon had written their story from the day they met to the present moment. It was not long, perhaps only a few pages, but every word was chosen with care. He had written about falling in love with her, about building their life together, about every important moment they had shared. "I know I have never been good with words the way you are," Deacon said softly. "But I wanted you to have something that shows how much these 20 years have meant to me. I thought maybe you could use the rest of the journal to keep writing our story. You have always been the one with words. I just wanted to give you a beginning." Victoria closed the journal and pressed it to her chest, tears streaming freely now. "This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." "You gave me my voice back," Deacon said, pulling her close. "The least I could do is put some words to paper for you." "I love you," Victoria said fiercely. "I love you so much, Deacon Rawlins. And I love you, Victoria Rawlins. Always have, always will." They stood together in the barn, holding each other, surrounded by the life they had built. Outside, they could hear their family laughing and celebrating, the sound of children playing, the rich tapestry of a life well lived. "We should get back to the party," Victoria said eventually. "In a minute." Deacon cupped her face in his hands and looked into her eyes. "I just want to say something first." "What is it?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For talking. For never being quiet when quiet was expected. For speaking up that day in town and every day since. For filling my life with words and laughter and love." "They said you talked too much, but I say you talked exactly the right amount. You brought me back to life, Victoria. You made me remember how to speak, how to feel, how to live. And I would not trade a single moment of these 20 years for anything." Victoria was crying in earnest now, and for once, she could not find the words to respond. So she did the only thing she could think of. She kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude and joy into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, she managed to whisper, "You really have learned how to use your words, haven't you?" "I had a good teacher," Deacon said, smiling. "The best teacher." "Well, this teacher thinks her student has graduated with honors." They walked back to the house hand in hand, ready to rejoin their family and celebrate. As they approached, they could hear Thomas telling a story, his voice rising and falling dramatically just like his mother's did. They could hear baby Emma giggling and Clara's gentle laughter and Sarah's quiet comments. "Listen to all that noise," Victoria said happily. "All those beautiful voices." "It is a good sound," Deacon agreed. "The best sound." They stepped into the house together, into the warmth and chaos and love of their family. Victoria immediately started talking, telling everyone about Deacon's gift, her words tumbling over each other in her excitement. Deacon stood beside her, quiet as always, but smiling. And if someone had asked him in that moment if he regretted falling in love with the woman who talked too much, he would have said no, because she had taught him that silence was not always golden. Sometimes the most precious thing in the world was the sound of a loved one's voice, filling the empty spaces, turning a house into a home, turning existence into life. They had found each other in the dust and danger of the Wild West, two unlikely souls who fit together perfectly. She gave him words, he gave her silence, and together they had built something beautiful. As the evening wore on and the party continued, Deacon found himself thinking about that day 20 years ago when he had first heard Victoria speaking on that platform. He had been drawn to her fire, her passion, her refusal to be silenced. He had not known then that loving her would change everything, that she would become his whole world, but he knew it now. And he was grateful for every loud, chaotic, beautiful moment they had shared. Later that night, after all the guests had gone home and the house was finally quiet, Victoria and Deacon lay in bed together. Victoria was still clutching her journal, already planning what she would write in it. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "Thank you for the journal and the words, and for loving me exactly as I am." "Thank you for letting me," Deacon replied. Victoria snuggled closer to him, resting her head on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, the same heartbeat that had been beside her for 20 years now. "Do you know what the best part of this whole journey has been?" she asked. "What?" "Learning that silence and words are not opposites. They are complements. Your silence makes my words mean more, and my words give your silence context. We are two halves of a whole, you and me." "Yes," Deacon agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We are." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling safe and loved and completely content. Tomorrow she would write in her new journal, continuing the story Deacon had started. She would write about their children and their grandchildren, about the ranch and the newspaper, about growing old together. But tonight, she was content to just be here in this moment with the man who had loved her when the world said she was too much. The man who had given her his silence and his strength and his steadfast heart. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, their story still being written with every breath, every heartbeat, every moment they shared. And if you had asked anyone in Wheatland, Wyoming about Deacon and Victoria Rawlins, they would have told you it was one of the great love stories of the territory. The quiet rancher and the woman who talked too much, who found in each other exactly what they needed. Who proved that love is not about changing who you are, but about finding someone who celebrates you exactly as you are. They lived out the rest of their days on that ranch, surrounded by family and love and the vast Wyoming sky. Victoria never did learn to be quiet, and Deacon never became a great talker. But it did not matter. They had found their balance, their harmony, their perfect match, and in the end that was more than enough. It was everything.